By nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, the angle of the ship had become terrifying. Standing upright was almost impossible. Loose furniture slid violently across the deck. People clung to railings, chimneys, and staircases in a desperate attempt to stay on their feet. Some prayed, some cried, some stood silently, as though they had already accepted their fate. Others simply stared into the darkness, unable to accept what was happening before their eyes. Then a deep, metallic roar echoed through the ship. It sounded unlike anything anyone had ever heard. Steel screamed under unimaginable pressure. For decades, historians argued over what happened during Titanic's final moments. Some survivors insisted the ship had broken apart before sinking. Others believed she had disappeared intact. More than 70 years later, the ocean itself revealed the truth. The enormous stress became too great. Titanic split into two massive sections. The bow plunged beneath the Atlantic first, disappearing into the darkness below. For a few horrifying moments, the stern rose almost vertically into the air, towering above the freezing ocean like a giant monument to human ambition. People clung desperately to the rails. Some lost their grip, others jumped, hoping to avoid being dragged down with the ship. Then, at exactly 2:20 a.m., the lights flickered one final time and went out forever. Silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then the stern slipped beneath the surface. The largest passenger ship ever built vanished into the Atlantic Ocean. The ocean that had appeared so peaceful only hours earlier now held more than 1,500 people fighting for their lives. Hundreds floated in the freezing black water, desperately searching for anything that might keep them alive. Some tried swimming toward nearby lifeboats. Others held onto floating debris. Parents called out the names of their children. Husbands searched desperately for their wives. Friends reached through the darkness, hoping to find one another before the cold claimed them. The cries for help echoed across the empty Atlantic. For those already inside the lifeboats, it became a nightmare they would never forget. They watched hundreds of people struggling in the freezing water just beyond their reach. Many wanted to go back, but fear stopped them. The officers worried that if too many desperate survivors tried climbing aboard, the small wooden boats would capsize, sending everyone into the icy sea. It was one of the most painful decisions made that night. Even today, historians continue debating whether more lives could have been saved if additional lifeboats had returned. Minute by minute, the voices began to fade. At first, hundreds of people cried for help. Then only dozens remained. Soon after, the Atlantic fell silent. An eerie silence settled over the water. According to historians, most of the victims who entered the ocean did not die from drowning. They died from hypothermia within 20 to 30 minutes. The freezing Atlantic had claimed them long before rescue could arrive. Hours after Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic, RMS Carpathia was still racing toward her last known position. Captain Arthur Rostron had pushed his ship beyond its normal operating speed, fully aware that every passing minute meant more lives could be lost. His crew prepared blankets, hot drinks, medical supplies, and every available space on board for survivors. No one knew exactly what they were about to find. At approximately 4 a.m., the first lifeboat emerged from the darkness. One by one, more small boats appeared, drifting silently across the freezing ocean. But the ship they were searching for was gone. Where the greatest passenger liner in the world had once sailed proudly, there was now nothing but scattered debris, floating pieces of wood, chunks of ice, and exhausted survivors wrapped in shock. The crew of Carpathia carefully began lifting survivors aboard. Some passengers were too weak to climb the ladders without assistance. Others stood silently, unable to process what had happened only a few hours earlier. Many kept staring back toward the empty horizon, hoping that somehow someone they loved would still appear out of the darkness. That moment never came. By the time the rescue operation was complete, approximately 706 people had survived. More than 1,500 others had been lost forever. Among them were some of the wealthiest people in the world, hard-working immigrants chasing a better future, entire families, children, crew members, musicians who continued playing until the very end, and engineers who knowingly sacrificed their own lives to keep the lights burning long enough for others to escape. When Carpathia finally arrived in New York, thousands of people crowded the docks despite the cold weather. Families desperately searched every lifeboat and every passenger stepping off the ship, hoping to recognize a familiar face. Many found the people they had prayed for. Many others returned home carrying only silence. Within days, newspapers around the world were filled with headlines that seemed impossible to believe. The ship that had represented the pinnacle of human engineering had sunk on her very first voyage. People demanded answers. How could something considered so advanced disappear beneath the ocean in less than 3 hours? Official investigations were launched in both the United States and the United Kingdom. Survivors, officers, engineers, wireless operators, and experts were questioned for countless hours. Piece by piece, investigators reconstructed the events of that night. Their conclusions revealed something remarkable. Titanic had not been destroyed by one catastrophic mistake. She had been defeated by a chain of smaller decisions. Ice warnings had been received throughout the day, yet the ship maintained nearly full speed. The lookouts had no binoculars because of a simple administrative oversight. There were not enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Several lifeboats departed only partially filled. A nearby ship capable of offering assistance never responded in time. Individually, none of those decisions guaranteed disaster. Together, they became one of the deadliest maritime tragedies in history. The disaster transformed international maritime law forever. New regulations required enough lifeboats for every passenger aboard every ship. 24-hour wireless radio monitoring became mandatory. Regular emergency drills became standard procedure. International ice patrols were established to monitor dangerous iceberg activity across the North Atlantic. Millions of people who sail across the oceans today remain safer because of the painful lessons learned from Titanic. But the story still wasn't over. For decades, one question continued haunting explorers and historians. Where was Titanic? The Atlantic Ocean covers millions of square miles. Its deepest regions are darker than night itself. Finding a single ship on the ocean floor seemed almost impossible. Year after year, expedition after expedition searched without success. Many believed the wreck would never be found. Then, in 1985, more than 70 years after the disaster, oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard and his team made one of the greatest discoveries in maritime history, nearly 12,500 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic. Their cameras captured something no human eyes had seen since 1912, Titanic. Resting silently in complete darkness, time itself seemed frozen. The famous bow still stood proudly on the ocean floor, while the stern lay hundreds of meters away, confirming what survivors had claimed decades earlier. The ship had indeed broken apart before disappearing beneath the sea for the first time. The ocean revealed the truth. Since then, multiple expeditions have explored the wreck in extraordinary detail. Luxury cabins have collapsed, wooden interiors have disappeared, metal railings have rusted away. Even the legendary Grand Staircase no longer exists. Scientists discovered colonies of iron-eating bacteria slowly consuming the ship's steel structure. Every year, Titanic changes. Every year, a little more of history disappears forever. Experts believe that one day, the wreck itself may completely collapse, leaving behind little more than scattered fragments resting on the ocean floor. Yet despite more than a century of scientific research, documentaries, books, and investigations, Titanic continues to capture the imagination of millions around the world. Not because it remains a mystery, but because it represents something far greater. It reminds us that technology, no matter how advanced, can never eliminate human error. It reminds us that confidence should never become overconfidence. And above all, it reminds us how a series of ordinary decisions can create extraordinary consequences. Perhaps that's why Titanic is remembered not simply as a ship, but as a warning that ambition without caution can become tragedy, a warning that nature is never truly conquered, and a reminder that history is often shaped not by fate alone, but by the choices people make when seconds matter most. More than a century has passed since that freezing April night. The passengers are gone, the crew is gone, even the ship itself is slowly disappearing beneath the Atlantic, yet the story refuses to fade. Because every time someone hears the name Titanic, they aren't just remembering a ship, they're remembering thousands of dreams that never reached their destination.